And we move on to the next session here. It's called Creating Sustainable Financial Models in Higher Education, and I would like to call upon Professor Ammar Kaka, Head of Campus and Executive Dean of Heriot-Watt University, Dubai, to give his speech.
How can I... What is it called? It's just one file, actually. It's called Kaka Luna or something. Please, yeah. Okay, so good morning. It's just before 12 o'clock, so good morning to you. My name is Ammar Kaka. I'm the head of Heriot-Watt University Dubai campus. This is a campus we've established almost just over 10 years ago here in Dubai in the academic city. And we have grown to have almost 4,000 students. And we recently started running PhDs, and we have our own purpose-built campus. So it's been a very, very exciting. I actually joined the campus itself in the year 2008, and it's been really an exciting period. Okay, so that's my presentation. How can I? Okay, so I've been asked to talk about financial models for higher education. This is absolutely a very complicated topic, and I've been given 10 minutes to do that. I've been told that I can probably extend the 10 minutes a bit, but I do realize that I'm probably standing between now and lunch, so I do not intend to keep you waiting for too long. So the purpose, what I will try to cover here is really the type of funding for universities, and mainly the private universities and the public universities. And probably I'll have a go at looking at the factors that influence, the financial factor that influence the success of universities. And whether there's a role for the government to play in this, and indeed the private sector. And probably towards the end, I'll focus on the international branch campus model. Okay, so here we're looking at the two aspects is actually the income universities generate and the cost. So you look at on the left-hand side is really the income, and typically a university will make more than its 50% of its income from teaching activities, and about a quarter from research, and then knowledge transfer and the rest. In terms of cost, again, is more than 50% of universities typically cost will be spent on human resources, mainly faculty and professional services staff. But then the majority of the rest would be on infrastructure and other cost items. I really wanted to stress right at the very beginning in my talk the importance of research for universities, and this is where it gets tricky in terms of financing. So first of all, higher education teaching is highly specialized, leading to a point more faculty. So if you take, for example, a master's program, and you want to resource that, and you could probably deliver the entire program using 2 members of staff, if those members of staff are dedicated to teaching activities only. But at that level, at higher education level, we teach highly specialized subjects, and therefore you tend not to be able to cover all these subjects areas using 1 or 2 people. Therefore, those people you're going to be appointing will be dedicating only partial or part of their time doing research, doing teaching, and therefore the rest is going to have to be doing something else, and that tend to be research. And the question is, where are you going to recover the funding and the finance for that part of the activity of members of staff. Also, is obviously research very important because it's part of the teaching activity as well. Research usually inform teaching, and obviously research is an important element of any UG and PG activities. We do obviously have dissertations, projects, and so on. And in fact, if you want to run a university, then the likelihood of attracting quality members of staff will be very much linked to the opportunities you're giving in terms of research opportunities. Okay, so back to the types of universities. There are really 4 types of universities. Those who are governmental universities, so they are owned by the government, and obviously all the funding comes from the government. There's also independent universities, but essentially publicly funded universities. So the majority or part of the funding they would get from the government. And then there's the private for-profit universities and the private non-profit universities. For the purpose of my talk, I'll focus on really the publicly funded universities and the non-profit universities. Government universities tend to be usually underfunded, and you have very high student staff ratios. Probably not the case in GCC, but often the case. The private for-profit universities tend to have other, obviously, drivers other than quality, maybe commercial drivers. Okay, so publicly funded universities, so they tend to be partially funded by the government. So there's a combination of private fundings and public funding, and it is actually the quality. If you want to deliver a quality of education, it costs quite a lot of money, and usually cannot be afforded entirely by the government. Fully funded studentships restricted to locals usually, so you have the opportunity to recruit students from either international or outside your states, and they tend to be private funded students. And increasingly, particularly in the UK and England, is, the tuition fees is now paid by the students. The government obviously help with the loans of the students. In terms of private universities, again, they're not entirely privately financed because, as private university, they would still have access to governmental, research grants through research councils and so on. But also they may have access to education fees, subsidized education fees for certain students. Through loans often. And sometimes actually in terms of infrastructure, the government also engage or participate or share the cost of infrastructure for private universities. So the question is which type of universities tend to do better, and probably one place to look at is the league tables. And here is the top 20 or top 20 American universities and how they rank in the global league tables. And I think one of the very first impression you would get out of this list is that the top up to 16 top universities in the world, the American ones, they're all private universities. Okay, so the next university is Michigan, which is a public university, and that's 22. Still a very, very good, highly ranked university, but obviously the private universities are doing better than in that particular league table than the public universities. So why is that? And I think we need to look at how much these universities charge for the education. And if you look at the typical and the average over the United States and what is actually charged for students, And you look at the subsidized students, so these tend to be students who are studying within the same state as a public university. So that's about just under $10,000. If you were, this is subsidized by the government. If it's not subsidized, then we're talking about an average fees of about $22,000. Now compare that with private institutions, and the figure starts to escalate to 31,000. So the private universities are getting higher money for teaching the students. If you look at the, if I take the top ranked universities in the world and how much they charge, then you're talking actually of figures much higher than 30,000, in fact higher than $40,000 per student. Like MIT and so on. But what also you would notice from this table is that some other non-United States universities start to feature in the top 10 tables, and these are the UK universities. These universities are not private universities. These are public universities. So what is going on here? If you look at the UK example, UK universities and how are they funded, and they are public university or so-called publicly funded university, they're actually only very partially funded by the government. So if you look at the teaching, the teaching income universities with GATE, that's just under 50% of a typical university. And these tend to be either, students with governmental loans or, overseas students or rest of the UK and so on. And then there's this element of research grants, which I'll talk about in a bit. But really, the public funding, the governmental grants, is only just under 20% of the entire funding for the university, a typical case. Having said that, the research grant is dominated still by the government, but these are for particular specific projects rather than grants given to universities. But this this funding body grants, governmental money, is still very, very important because it allows students, it allows universities to decide on areas to invest in, to do blue sky research, and have that longer vision, opportunities to look at. Okay, so which type of funding, coming back to the same question, is better? I think it's not really the type of funding which determines, the quality of the university, but it's actually how much of the funding. But also, in my opinion, there need to be the right mix between the state grants and the student paid fees. And for research, the right mix of various resources of funding, again, states, which allow you to do the blue skies and strategic initiatives, but also the ones which are very much dedicated to specific proposals and areas of research. Okay, here in the MENA region, we tend to have, the higher education dominated by the governmental institutions, and those who are privately or private for-profit universities. So that's really what dominates this particular region. Now, transnational education is a new, relatively new in this region, but obviously the international branch campus model has grown, and now Dubai, as many of you would know, has the largest number of branch campuses in the world. So this is actually obviously a phenomena and a supply of education which is growing very, very rapidly here. So I will focus on the international branch campuses, say a few words about that. So in terms of financing, they essentially are privately funded. Here we entirely rely on private education. The setup tend to be very, very expensive, and that would obviously be associated with financial risks. And if you wanted to deliver a comparable quality education to the one you have in your home campus, then you're really looking to charge almost the same level of fees as you would do in the home campus. And access to research funding is obviously very, very important, but obviously very tricky. You would think, can you subsidize research activity? It's very, very complicated to do that. It's almost impossible, because if essentially, for example, in the case of a UK university, there's a lot of public funding going on in the UK, and you cannot actually justify subsidizing your research here through taxpayers' money from another country. In terms of potential role for the government, really it's primarily towards the research side. The government certainly can help or play a role at the research funding side. Provision of scholarships also, if you have a home students, governments can subsidize or can pay the fees for those local students, and also providing some subsidy for the setup stage of these campuses. In terms of the private sector, I'm talking about not necessarily the universities themselves, but the private sector in general, organizations, companies doing business in the country. Obviously they are driven by commercial drivers, objectives, but they can potentially play a role in funding higher education. For example, you can have collaborative research, or they can share in the infrastructure cost, it could be, as condition for winning work and winning jobs, that they would give back to the community and to the society and to higher education. Academic institutions need to do more, but I think that's us needs to be doing more commercially relevant research also. So that would make sense to commercial or private organization to fund us. Okay, so my final remarks on this subject is that research is essential, but cannot be cross-subsidized by either home campuses or by the funding of the students, by their tuition fees. And also government has a role to play in either directly funding education, or encouraging the private sector to fund particularly the research. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much,
I'm happy
sir.
to take questions.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to ask. Do you have questions? Anyone has questions or anything you want to ask? I could pass on the mics. We have any questions here? No. No. Anyone from there? Okay, if you have any more questions, if it pops up later, you know whom to catch.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
You.
And I would request our Mr. Raghav Mittal to kindly give away this memento to Professor Kaka, Head of Campus and Executive Dean of Heriot-Watt University, Dubai.